statue of Dwight Eisenhower at the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum. Statue of Ike. Looking this way, that's his boyhood home, the White House on the right. And if you look to the left, that's the chapel where he's buried. It's a portrait of his official portrait as president. Dwight Eisenhower was the 34th president of the United States. He was born in Denison, Texas on October 14th, 1890. Before becoming president, Dwight Eisenhower had been a World War II military hero and one of the most important generals in American history. During World War II, the United States, England, Canada, and other countries joined together as allies to fight Adolf Hitler's Nazi army in Europe. Allied forces also battled against Japan in the Pacific Ocean. It was the most destructive war ever. General Eisenhower's job was to win the European part of the war. In 1943, President Franklin Roosevelt named Dwight Eisenhower Supreme Allied Commander. This was a huge promotion that put Eisenhower in charge of all armies fighting Nazi Germany. Roosevelt wanted Eisenhower to head up an Allied invasion that would stop the German army. Here's a cartoon illustrating his long title, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Forces. Here's your nameplate, new nameplate, sir. That's thanks. Just set it on my desk. We're in Abilene, Kansas. The invasion General Eisenhower plan was known as Operation Overlord. The exact day of the invasion was called D-Day. During the war, Adolf Hitler's army had taken over or attacked countries in North Africa. He also invaded European countries, including Poland, Belgium, Holland, Russia, and France. General Eisenhower hoped to surprise the German army on the beaches of Normandy, France. The plan was to drive Hitler's army out of France and back into Germany. The risky invasion was the largest gathering of forces in the history of the world. Thousands of ships, fighter planes, and soldiers gathered off the coast of England. They were ready and waiting to receive General Eisenhower's instructions. It shows Eisenhower talking to paratroopers before they parachuted into France on D-Day, June 6, 1944. And here you see Normandy. The pink part is kind of the first phases of the battle, the dark pink where they landed on the first day and where they pushed out. And you'll see 5 beaches from left to right: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. 2, those are the 5 landings. 2 were American operations under General Omar Bradley, and 3 were under General Dempsey, both Canadian and British forces. But you see that Eisenhower was in overall command. On June 6, General Eisenhower gave his order, "Okay, let's go," and the D-Day invasion was on. Thousands of lives were lost, but the Allied armies eventually forced the Nazi army back into Germany. And this shows some of the forces resupplying the initial wave of landings. U.S. troops that landed in Normandy on D-Day under the command of General Eisenhower were part of an all-out assault on northern France. It was the beginning of a sweep through Europe that would finally defeat Nazi Germany. Knowing he would soon lose the war, Adolf Hitler committed suicide on April 30th, 1945. A few days later, Germany surrendered. The war against Japan would rage on for a few more months, but the war in Europe was over, and General Eisenhower returned home a hero. Here he's returning home during a parade in New York City. They used to have what they called ticker tape parades, where they would have the stock market tickers, little pieces of paper that they would tear up into little pieces and shower down on the heroes. When Dwight Eisenhower was a baby, his family moved from Denison, Texas to Abilene. That's where I am now, in Kansas. Mr. Eisenhower got a job at a dairy there. Dwight had 2 older brothers and 3 younger brothers. All of them were called Ike at one time or another, but that nickname stayed with Dwight throughout his life. The Eisenhower boys had a happy life growing up in their Kansas farm town. It shows a painting that Dwight Eisenhower grew up in Kansas farm, a lot like others shown in this John Stewart Curry painting, the homestead and the building of the barbed wire fence. I don't like the looks of this. Me either. Maybe we should take a day off and go swimming down the creek. Dwight learned important lessons from what went on around him. Once, when he was about 4 years old, Ike kept getting chased around by a gang of angry geese. The geese kept bullying Ike until he fought back with a broom. Ike learned that then that the best way to deal with an enemy was from a position of strength. Ike was an average student in school, except when it came to math and sports. Ike loved playing baseball and football. When he was in 8th grade, Ike scraped his knee. It was a small cut, but it soon became infected, and suddenly Ike's leg swelled up like a balloon. Security's too tight. We'll have to call it off. Darn, it looks like they were going to cut off his leg. Antibiotics hadn't been discovered yet, and Ike was at risk of losing his legs. Doctors wanted to cut it off above the knee to save Ike's life. Dwight Eisenhower refused, though. He said he'd rather die than not be able to play football again. Ike asked his older brother Edgar to sleep outside his room and guard against any doctors who might try to sneak in and operate. This is a picture of him as a teenager. Presumably, this is where it happened. It's a picture of him playing football. Back row, third from the left. Ike could be a stubborn boy. In this case, it paid off. Miraculously, his legs slowly began to get better, and Ike went on to become a football star in high school and in college when he went to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Here's him at West Point in 1911. Ike never had any particular desire to be a soldier. He went to West Point mainly because the education was free if he agreed to serve in the Army. The school also had a great football team. After Ike graduated in 1915, he was sent around to different Army bases to train new soldiers. At an Army base in Texas, Ike met the love of his life, Mamie Dowd. Just think, Mamie, if you marry me, this could all be yours. Mamie was from a wealthy Colorado family that owned a winter home near their Army base. Mamie and Ike fell in love right away. They ended up getting married just a few months later in 1916. There's a picture of the young couple. Dwight Eisenhower and his bride, Mamie, shortly after their wedding in 1916. Even though Mamie wasn't used to the rough military life, she made it her goal to help Ike become the best soldier possible. Over the years, Ike and Mamie moved to dozens of different Army bases. They had 2 sons, Icky and John. Sadly, their first son, Icky, died from scarlet fever when he was only 3 years old. Ike and Mamie never got over their loss. Here's the house again. Eisenhower home from 1898 to 1916. And there again is the chapel. I don't think we're going to do that. Ike then volunteered to join the Army convoy driving across the country from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. The Army was curious to test U.S. roads in case they were needed in the event of a national emergency. This shows you from Eisenhower's own collection a photo taken during his trip to check the nation's road. It includes a note in his handwriting referring to the bridge that the truck is about to cross, hoping it will hold. Please use alternative route. Have a nice day. Ike learned many of the nation's roads were in terrible shape or even unusable. The trip took over 2 months. Ike never forgot the experience. He knew that someday someone would have to do something to fix the problem. What Ike didn't know at the time was that he would be the one to do it. When the United States entered World War II in 1941, Ike was called to Washington, D.C. to help work on war plans. He was then sent to England to set up military operations there. At first, Ike found that British and American soldiers weren't very friendly toward each other, and this was a serious problem. The likable, open-minded Ike went to work right away to fix things. It shows the Rock of Gibraltar that guards the entrance of the Mediterranean at the Atlantic. Ike managed to win the trust and respect of both American and British soldiers. Ike's ability to get people to work together and make things run smoothly helped win important battles in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. For part of the war, General Eisenhower had a command office in the safety of a cave deep inside the giant Rock of Gibraltar. I hope your new office is acceptable, sir. It's fine, thanks, except I can't seem to hang up any of my pictures. It's because it's in a cave. It's rock. Okay. When World War II ended, many people tried to get Ike interested in running for president. At first, Ike had no interest at all. Instead, he took a job as head of Columbia University in New York City. 2 years later, President Harry Truman appointed Eisenhower to be Supreme Commander of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO was set up to keep the peace between Western European nations and the Soviet Union. During this time, leaders from both the Democratic and Republican parties kept after Ike to run for president. There he is in 1952, campaigning for president. Finally, in 1952, Ike agreed to run as the Republican candidate. Ike easily won the election, and the slogan, "I like Ike," caught on right away. There's the famous sticker. Eisenhower was president during a time when the U.S. economy was good. Many people had enough money to buy nice homes and fancy new cars. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president for 2 4-year terms. It was one of the best times in the United States. There seemed to be plenty of jobs around. Many people were able to buy homes, televisions, and cool-looking cars for the first time. Rock and roll music had just been invented. In 1956, Ike signed a bill to start building modern highways across the country, too. On the other hand, it was an extremely dangerous time in American history. After Ike was elected president, he traveled to the Asian country of South Korea. Communist North Korea had just invaded South Korea, and the United States had sent soldiers there to help the South Koreans. Ike wanted to end the fighting. He remembered his childhood lesson with the Geese bullies. Ike let it be known that if the war didn't stop, he would be willing to use the United States' new atomic weapons against North Korea. Soon after this, the North and South Korea came to an agreement, and the fighting stopped. I did not know that. He really threatened to use nuclear weapons. Trying to turn the page. There. Another big worry during the 1950s was dealing with the Soviet Union. The Russians, who were once friendly with the United States, now had their own atomic bomb. They seemed determined to force their way of communist life on the world. Russian leaders thought people would be better off if the government controlled businesses, railroads, factories, and farms. Picture of the Soviet Army in Red Square, Moscow, 1954. Under communism, people lost many of their rights and freedoms. Anyone who spoke out against it might be sent to prison or even killed. Ike's biggest challenge was to stop communism from spreading to free countries without starting a third world war. Here's a picture of Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon. He's kind of the fourth from the left, meeting with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev in Washington, D.C. in 1959. President Eisenhower did a great job keeping the United States out of war. This may have been his most important accomplishment. He received criticism, though, for not doing enough to support the rights of African Americans. Ike did sign an important bill that protected African American voters, but many people felt he could have done more. Then in 1960, just when peace talks with the Soviet Union seemed to be going better than ever, something really bad happened. A U.S. spy plane crashed in the Soviet Union, and at first, President Eisenhower denied it was a spy plane, but soon he had to admit he had lied. The Russians were furious. The incident hurt future peace talks for years. President Eisenhower better have a darn good excuse for this one, which was an American pilot in Russia. In 1961, Ike and Mamie left the White House and retired to their farm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Ike spent time painting pictures and playing his favorite game, golf. He wrote a few books and gave advice to other presidents. Dwight Eisenhower died on March 28, 1969. Even though Ike was one of the greatest military leaders ever, he hated war. Ike worked harder than anyone to keep world at peace. This is one reason people really did like Ike. Shows you, after he retired, former President Eisenhower with former Vice President Nixon in 1961 spent lots of time relaxing and playing golf. The end.